Let's do a miniature deep dive on the enormous Space Marine release wave that's coming from Games Workshop in the not too distant future, with everything that we know about the new kits so far. Hello and welcome back to Warspecs Tactics, where today I thought it was worth devoting another video to the Space Marine release wave that's coming out soon, with a whole bunch of refreshed units for quite a lot of miniatures within the range, from Scouts to Assault Marines, Terminators and the Command Squad. I did talk to these guys a little bit at the time at the reveals at the Nova Open, but I must admit that was a bit of a quick overview, recorded in the early hours of the morning, and I thought it might be nice to take a bit more of a steadied approach, put a few more pictures together a bit nicely, and talk through a few more things like a bit of speculation on pricing and gameplay, and what else a Space Marine release wave could mean. These kits were all the ones that were revealed at the Nova Open. Basically this felt like the mirror match of the Tyranids, the things that the Space Marines would have received if they'd won the Ogram campaign, but as it turned out the Tyranids got revealed first, and it actually seemed that the Tyranid release date might have actually preceded the Space Marines literally due to that campaign. Kind of surprising to see Games Workshop actually following through with release dates that follow a global campaign and results submitted, obviously if they did indeed report them correctly. With the precedent of the Tyranid release wave just gone for pre-order, we know basically how the Space Marines are going to be functioning. It seems that seeing as the Space Marines have got a very similar number of kits, it's quite likely that they're all just going to be dropping at exactly the same time on the same release day as the Codex, rather than a staggered release. And I guess this probably isn't going to be too far behind the Tyranids Codex, seeing as the first two codexes of an edition tend to drop fairly close to each other. I guess in theory it could be as early as pre-orders next week. I suspect somewhere within the next 3 to 5 weeks at the latest though. I'd be very surprised if we got towards the end of October and we hadn't heard anything about these Marines coming out in full. As we know, the models in question are the Jump Pack Intercessors and Captain, the Terminator kit Chaplain and Captain, the Sternguard Company Heroes kit and Scouts kit, most of which generally updates on things that have come before. Plus we should have a new Space Marine Combat Patrol that I'll talk about in just a second, and there are some questions standing like what happens with the Ballistus Dread or some Space Marine characters, which I think we might already know answers to. While we are on the subject of Space Marines once more though, I thought I'd just quickly mention the channel giveaway for October, which seeing as these releases seem to have interested people really quite a lot, I thought I'd do just for a collection of basically all the new Space Marines that got revealed at Nova. So the channel giveaway for the start of October will be for the miniatures pictured here, 5 Jump Intercessors, 5 Terminators, 5 Sternguard, the 5 heroes of the chapter miniatures, the Terminator Captain and Chaplain and the Jump Pack Captain, the new Codex and 5 Scouts. Should be a reasonable start to the new Space Marines, and there'll be 3 prizes of that up for offer. I will order them as soon as they're released by Games Workshop. As normal with the channel giveaways, there's 2 main ways to enter. Support the channel on Patreon and help keep these videos coming. Any amount gives you automatic entry each month. The link's down in the video description if you'd like to check that out. There's also other things like seeing videos early on offer. Or you can support the channel on social media completely for free. Subscribe to the YouTube channel and like the Facebook page, and then to actually enter the draw, there's a Facebook post that appears on the 1st of October. Respond to that with a photo of any 40k mini or imagery, along with your name and the date handwritten within the same photo. That last bit is just to deter Facebook bots and spammers. Then following that, I do the draw with a random number generator, and it's announced on the channel update video around the 4th of October. And as soon as the Games Workshop actually release these Space Marines, I'll order them in. As I say, I'd be surprised if it's too far into October. The models will be dispatched when I get them. If the release is drawn out a little bit or supplies limited, it might delay things a little, but I will get them to the winners just as soon as possible. In any case, feel free to check out the Patreon page or the Facebook page. Both of those are links down in the video description. Back to the details of these releases though, and the first Space Marine release wave. And judging by the Tyranids precedent, it looks highly likely that the Space Marine Strike Force Octavia set, that is the new Combat Patrol, will probably receive a similar box set to the Tyranids one. Games Workshop took perhaps a slightly unusual step with the Tyranids one. Their Combat Patrol went straight to the Games Workshop web store and isn't available for third-party people to order. It is kind of a redundant kit that you can get the same thing of via the 40k starter set and a box of barb gaunts for slightly cheaper, and it seems kind of likely that the Space Marine box set would probably be just the same. Essentially a kit that's never going to make sense to buy when the 40k starter set is still out, and you can just add a library into that and get the same as this plus some Tyranids for less. I guess ideally I might hope that Games Workshop might release this for a little bit cheaper than a regular Combat Patrol, given that in terms of value savings versus the multi-part kit separately, it's going to be one of the worst values out of any of them, but my guess is that's probably not going to be the case. In any case, the actual Combat Patrol box for Space Marines I suspect to be quite underwhelming. Perhaps the other major question for the Space Marine release is what happens to the other kits from Leviathan. the Apothecary Biologist, the Ballistus Dreadnought, and the Combi Weapon Lieutenant. None of these have been announced as individual miniatures yet, though it seems kind of likely that Games Workshop will release them as individual kits, particularly the Apothecary, as he's a completely new unit that you don't have a near count as for. I guess it's always possible that they might release some of these miniatures individually, but it seems kind of unlikely for the Apothecary or the Combi Weapon Lieutenant, at least judging by the Indomitors box set where we had things like the Blade Guard Ancient and the Judiceer. Both of those locked into a box set alongside other miniatures from the box. They come packaged with Blade Guard and Eradicators now. I'd guess that the same fate's probably going to happen to the Combi Weapon Lieutenant and the Apothecary. It might make sense that they could be packaged alongside the Monopose Sternguard kit, as it appears that they share a sprue within the Leviathan box. It will be a bit of a weird collection of miniatures that, though. Neither of those characters can join the Sternguard, and I guess it would be a far worse deal than if you bought them through Leviathan, at least if the precedent for the Honoured of the chapter is maintained. Otherwise, no news on the Ballistus Dreadnought yet. It is on its own sprue within the Leviathan box, so it might just literally be released as a fairly basic plastic kit like that. I have a feeling that if they were going to follow up with some multi-part different weapons for it, then we probably would have heard about it at the Nova preview, though I guess they still have the chance to surprise us. Getting into the models that were officially revealed though, first up we have the Jump Intercessors, certainly on the wish list for Primaris players for really quite a long time now. It has been kind of strange how many years they've let the Primaris line go without a jump pack assault squad type thing, despite having two things with jump packs that fire at range. Broadly speaking, I think the models for these have gone down pretty well. They're pretty much what I would have imagined as Primaris Space Marines with jump packs on, maybe not enormously different in styling compared with the regular Assault Intercessors, appearing to be armed with heavy bolt pistols and chainswords for the majority of the squad. Otherwise, Games Workshop's mini promotional video for them does give us a pretty good view of the new jump packs. I like these ones a bit more than the Inceptor style ones, to be honest. I quite like the big twin turbine design, kind of similar to the standard Assault Marines. I feel like the Inceptors have maybe deviated away from it a little bit too far, and I'm kind of glad to see that these guys don't have any grav plates on their fleet or anything. The Blood Angel with a plasma pistol also kind of implies that you might still be able to take plasma pistols as a special weapon within the regular squad and not just on the Sergeant. I guess it's not impossible that it could be a Blood Angel Sergeant, but it looks like a regular Marine to me. Looks like the Sergeant model is the one on the right with the Hand Flamer and Power Fist, and he does seem to be on a different sort of base with a different angle there. I guess the Sergeant have the tilt plates as well, which the Blood Angel doesn't, so that would be another mark to say that he's probably not a Sergeant model. Here's just a small side-by-side with three of the new Assault Intercessors compared with the Assault Squad that has sadly gone away now. Was maybe a bit of a shame to lose the Assault Squad, which isn't really all that not order kit. It does have some fun upgrades like the Eviscerator, which looks like it's not going to be replicated into the new Jump Pack Intercessors, and the same with the Flamer, I would presume. Otherwise, quite a lot of similarities. They're still jumping off little bits of terrain and things, maybe a little bit less obvious than before. I feel like the Primaris models look quite nicely proportioned and fairly dynamic as well. I think they managed to handle that pretty nicely. Otherwise, with some more of the promo pictures, it looks like there's options for them, both helmeted and non-helmeted. You can have a bunch of Space Marines with Mohawks if you want, I suppose. And the Sergeant War Gear looks like it's going to be at least fairly similar to the Assault Intercessor Sergeant, either a Plasma Pistol and Hand Flamer, or Power Sword and Power Fist, though no mention of Thunderhammers. Pricing-wise, it looks like the box is going to be a box set of 5. I suspect that's going to be priced at Games Workshop standardish price for 5 Elite Infantry models, which would be around £37.50, $60 or €50. For that example, I'm going by the Einherjar Hearthguard for the Leagues of Votann. Finally, in game, I feel like just being armed with a whole bunch of chainswords means they're going to be primarily good against light infantry and not a whole load else. Maybe not the most helpful thing in the Space Marine lineup when we've already got things like Outriders for that. Hopefully they don't really deviate too far away from the standard Assault Squad loadout. At least they'll still be able to have a Power Fist with potentially more attacks, and I'd hope that they might keep the Mortal Wound impact hits. Quite nice to see some Jump Assault Primaris though. Should be interesting enough for Blood Angels and maybe pave the way for a range refresh for them. I think we were always going to get the generic guys before we got fancy Death Company jump packs and things. With character joining, I guess Dante would probably be able to join them as he's also Primaris. The other unit that I suppose will be able to join them is the Jump Pack Captain, a slightly bigger and fancier guy with a cape and an ornate laurel wreath. Looks like he's looming a bit taller than the rest of them, seeing as he's perching himself on a particularly high spur of construction things on his base, though I would say maybe not the most dynamic posing in the world. I guess you perhaps have to imagine him hurtling through the air with that sort of thing, though it does look just a little bit like he's maybe standing kind of stationary there. War gear wise, it seems like the captain's going to have at least a reasonable amount of flexible gear, though I'm a bit sad to see the iconic Smash Captain build of Thunderhammer and Storm Shield doesn't look like it's supported. Seems that in the one hand he can either have Chainsword, Power Fist or Relic Blade, and in the offhand he's either got a Hand Flamer, Heavy Bolt Pistol or Plasma Pistol. I'd guess that perhaps Power Fist and Plasma Pistol might be the way to go for him, to having the best chance of having a good threat against heavies. Like with a lot of characters at the moment though, it is a bit of a shame that they're not a little bit more able to help out their squad against tanks and things. Power Fists just feel a little bit sad wounding on 5+ against armour and vehicles. Price wise, I'd expect somewhere around the £25, €32.50 or $40 mark. That's based on the Gravis Captain. And gameplay wise, during the stream they did reveal that his special rule was basically remaining unchanged from the Jump Pack Captain at the moment. They say he gives his unit +1 strength on the charge, which I suppose is helpful enough for the assault squad. Going up to strength 5 is handy. It's perhaps not quite as good as it used to be though with the stretched toughness chart. Otherwise, I suppose it's likely the standard captain free stratagems. His war gear might be a little bit more limited, but he should gain extra wounds and attack for becoming Primaris, I suppose. And I guess overall how good he is going to heavily depend on how strong the jump intercessors are. They feel like they're the best jump pack hope for the Codex unless they heavily rewrite the Vanguard Veterans. Speaking of veterans, we also have the new Sternguard kit as well, resplendent with a sergeant with a classic back banner, which is kind of fun. These guys have actually perhaps surprised a little bit in terms of war gear options. They do seem to be trying to mirror the old Sternguard kit fairly reliably. I was thinking that seeing as the new Sternguard vet datasheets didn't really have options for things like Power Fist or melee gear on the sergeant, nor any sort of heavy flamer equivalent, that we might not be getting those. For the multi-part Sternguard kit though, I feel like this is done fairly well to reimagine the shooty veterans for a Primaris era. Games Workshop confirmed that they could all be armed with either combi weapons or the bolt rifles, though unless they change anything drastically it looks like the bolt rifles are going to be pretty much directly superior against the vast majority of targets. And perhaps the most exciting update for the squad is the option to trade out the heavy bolter that they got from the Leviathan box for a Pyre Cannon. Basically looking like a Pyre Blaster but got a lot fatter. It's got twin barrels and a really quite big chunky fuel tank underneath it, basically the equivalent of a Primaris Heavy Flamer I suppose. Otherwise the Sergeant's war gear options are either a Chainsword or a Power Fist that you can see the Crimson Fist one sporting here. I do notice that the Crimson Fist one is fighting with a Bolt Pistol and Power Fist there. If you have to give up your bolt rifle to get the fancy melee weapon, it might be a bit more of a side grade. You could make the squad a lot better in combat, but you might just be weakening them at their actual intended purpose. Again, for these guys, I predict pricing somewhere around the £37.50, $60 or €50 mark for 5 of them. That would seem kind of reasonable per Games Workshop's 5-man Elite Infantry box sets. Obviously that might be a lot more expensive than how people might have been able to get hold of them from the Leviathan box. I suppose just for representing the bolt rifle ones though, you could probably do a pretty good job of just converting up some fancy intercessors with some other different head swaps and armor accessories. They're definitely a unit that you could make on a budget if you wanted to. Rules wise, seem likely that they're going to keep their signature devastating wounds that they've had since 10th edition came out. It makes them really quite an interesting squad for taking with Oath of Moment, and 4 rerolls meaning that you get a lot more devastating wounds out of them. It's particularly fun on the heavy bolter. Probably the biggest question is what the Pyre Cannon will do, if it'll have any sort of funky stats, and maybe a little bit suspect as to how exciting this one's going to be. The Pyre Blasters are basically just flamers with +1 strength. This one could just be a heavy flamer with strength 6, though I guess if they do go by Sternguard they might also get devastating wounds on it as well. Next up, we're back to the new Scout Squad. These guys updating the standard Space Marine Scouts to a more Primaris scale, and otherwise keep a fair amount of the aesthetics of the old ones really, with the options for things like bolt guns, shotguns, and bolt pistols and combat blades, the Sergeant wielding a chainsword. We've kind of soft known that these guys were coming for a very long time after Games Workshop unveiled those Black Templar neophytes, and they do seem to be done in a similar sort of style and scaling to them. The kit in terms of war gear options does perhaps seem to be a little bit more adventurous compared with the standard scout kit, but it doesn't look like it's going to be so extensive that you can make either the standard scouts or the sniper scouts from it. Games Workshop's article said that you can either arm them all with shotguns, bolt guns, or pistols and blades. They've got the classic heavy weapon options redone here with the underslung drum-fed heavy bolter, plus a standard missile launcher. I think that might be one of the first standard missile launchers that we've seen in the Primaris era models. And then there are just a couple more interesting funky pieces of kit on show. There seems to be a grapnel launcher for one guy with a combat blade. I kind of wonder if that's going to have any interesting in-game effects. and a single sniper with a camo cloak. Unfortunately, it does really sound like there's just going to be one of those though, so if you want an entire squad of snipers, it would still be the Eliminators for that. I did think it was at least a little bit interesting that in the promo video they looked like there were 10 of these guys on show as opposed to 5. Does make me wonder a little bit as to whether they're going to be released as a 5-man individual scout squad or a 10-man kill team. Things like the grapnel launcher and the individual sniper do kind of strike me as things that could be kill team specialists, and I suppose there's always the option that they could both release them as a regular kit and then also a separate kit with kill team upgrades as well. That is what eventually happened with the Leagues of Votann Hearthkin Warriors, though there was a bit of a gap between the one coming out and the second. Here's a side-by-side of the old scouts versus the new scouts. I feel like while they've kept the spirit of them the same, you can tell a little bit as to how miniature design has come on within the last 15 years or so. I do vaguely remember when these guys on the left came out and replaced the old metal ones. I guess one of the biggest changes to the design has been the addition of some knee pads, kind of similar to how the Cadian Guardsmen got those as well, but otherwise just seem to be looking a bit bigger, tougher and chunkier. Otherwise, beyond just model updates, I'd guess that this probably means that the Scout Sniper Squad is likely going to be dead as a datasheet. There's no full sniper combo that's able to be built from this, and I guess that might fall under Games Workshop's no model, no rules. It's quite possible they could go to Legends, or even just count them as Eliminators or something. Or maybe be ashamed to lose them for the Space Marine faction as they were quite good in game, with their lone operative style not being shot rules. In hindsight, Scouts getting 2 wounds at the start of 10th edition might well just be a reflection on them getting this new kit coming soon. I guess they were the last of the 1 wound Space Marines that, now they've got their Primaris upgrade, have got 2 wounds as well. Price-wise, it'd really depend on whether they do release them as a kill team or a 5-model box set. I think I'd be hopeful if it were 5-model box sets, then it might be a little bit cheaper than the most elite of the infantry. These guys aren't going to be costing quite as many points in game as things like Sternguard or the jump pack Intercessors, I'd imagine. I might just pay a little bit less, given that Games Workshop often tend to charge a bit less for slightly more hardy or less elite units from time to time. Otherwise, if they did release them as a full kill team box, might be kind of similar to the Phobos Strike Team. That was £42.50, €55 or $70. So it would be a lot more, but then you would get more scouts for the money, I guess. In game, I feel like the scout squad is maybe a little bit niche currently, kind of competing with Phobos and Eliminators for mid-board units, and they're probably not going to be helped out too much by losing the Landspeeder Storm as a support choice that was kind of interesting for deploying them. Their special rule at the moment would be to allow a redeploy greater than 6 inches away from enemy models. That is handy enough and could be good for jumping around the board doing secondaries and things, I guess. Seems at least fairly likely that it will probably remain unchanged, as a lot of the other ones are reportedly not changing. Next up, and back to the more elite Space Marines, we've got the Heroes of the Chapter, basically the old command squad plus captain reimagined. In this box set it looks like it's 2 veterans, one with a heavy bolter, one with a funky bolt rifle and the option to build him with an bionic arm. A Primaris champion, apparently finally re-entering the range and staying for good. An ancient with a different flavour of banner, with a slightly more held aloft one that isn't quite as full length, and a new Primaris Captain miniature to add to the many that we have so far. This one does feel like they're trying to go for the spirit of the older style Space Marine Command Squad, which was initially never really sold with a captain, it was just the miniatures in the background, but it looks like they're trying to ape the style of the reboxed kit as opposed to that. I guess the biggest differences between the two are that there's no apothecary in the new one. They've been very much their own character leaders for a while now, and that means that there's one less model in the box overall. They didn't mention that there was any big flexible war gear on the 2 veterans. Previously, the old command squad has had lots of really quite flexible choices for the veterans within the unit. It might be that they're a bit more of a set thing now with just a heavy bolter and a bolt rifle, though I suppose they could have some fun war gear to choose from. As ever with the characters, it does look like the captains have a bit more flexibility with options. He's maybe not a million miles away from the jump pack one, having the option for a power fist or power sword in the left hand, and then either a bolt rifle, neo-volkite pistol, or plasma pistol in the right hand. And Games Workshop also mentioned that they've got an option for a decorative tabard or scabbard as well. I guess you choose the scabbard if he's got the sword, otherwise you wouldn't have anything to put in it. This Dark Angels version is also modelling the head swap as well. I feel like, as with quite a lot of characters, I'd probably still choose the helmet though. Price-wise, I'd guess these are probably going to be a bit more expensive than the standard 5-man unit, given that Games Workshop usually likes a character tax. Command type units often get charged at a premium, often because they cost a few more points. I feel like at the least it's going to be something like £40, €55 or $65, That'd be the same as the heavy Intercessors, though with a bit of pessimism I could see it being a bit more than that. Otherwise, from the gameplay hints they dropped, it sounds like they're going to be pretty similar to the offering for the Command Squad at the moment, something that isn't really commonly taken in optimised lists at all. As with the current Command Squad, it sounds like the champion gets precision melee, the banner gets extra objective control and will defend against battle shock because of the way that the modifiers work. And furthermore, on top of that, they did say that this time round they'll have a -1 to wound when there's a character in the unit. Despite this though, I still don't feel like they're very likely to be durable per point, just because they're going to be paying for extra fancy gear like the champion and the ancient and that heavy bolter. I do also kind of wonder whether or not the Primaris champion might very quickly lose his individual datasheet that he had briefly at the start of 10th edition. If this going forward is the only way to buy him from Games Workshop, it might mean that he just gets rolled into this unit and you're not able to field him in another way. I guess for anyone who does already have a Primaris champion though, plus an ancient, you could probably kind of kit bash another couple of veterans to make up the unit. Might not be the hardest one to assemble from scratch if you didn't like this kit that much. Next up for the main big squads, we've also got the new Space Marine Terminators, very much the poster children of 10th edition, and a kit that we were basically absolutely guaranteed that we were going to get given the Leviathan box release. That only had the assault cannon, so we definitely needed the other options like the Cyclone missile launcher and heavy flamer. These guys are going to be a full multi-part plastic kit as opposed to the more monopose offering, and it still looks like they've brought their pet teleport homer out to play. They have shown off a few of the other war gear bits as well. The Cyclone missile launcher on the new bigger badder Terminators is looking very chunky there. It'd usually be between that and the assault cannon for heavy weapon upgrades in my opinion. The assault cannon is particularly nice if you can get Oath of Moment on the targets. I do notice that the chap in the middle there appears to have a power fist plus also the tilt plate that makes him look like the sergeant. I kind of wonder whether that might be a small chance that you can actually take power fists on the sergeant now. It's always felt a bit strange them being lumbered with power swords as generally a bit of inferior war gear. I suppose it is kind of iconic. Otherwise, compared with the kit from Leviathan, we've also got the option of Chain Fist, it would seem. Given that they're a full option for the squad, I'd guess they're probably going to include enough bits to assemble the Power Fist as either Power Fist or Chain Fist. I feel like that would probably be sensible. Pricing wise, I'm a little bit unsure about the Terminators. I wouldn't be too surprised if Games Workshop charged a bit more of a premium for them than most of the other elite infantry that they sell. I guess I'd be hopeful for £37.50, €50 or $60. I think there's a reasonable chance it could be the next price bracket up though, given their size and bulk increase. They might put them at the same sort of level as heavy Intercessors maybe. I guess at least if you do want Terminators for fairly cheap, they're not too hard to come by with things like the starter sets. At least for more rank and file ones, besides anything with fancy special weapons like the heavy flamer or cyclone missile launcher, should be fairly easy to get the rank and file ones for quite cheap. Otherwise, no current news on assault Terminators yet. A little bit disappointing that they weren't announced, and Games Workshop did confirm that this kit don't build them. I suppose there might be the possibility that they could come out alongside Dark Angels if and when they redo some Deathwing Terminators. Just seems a bit strange that they'd release the standard Terminators but not the assault ones. In game, no real reason to think that the Terminators would change too much for the Space Marines at this stage, I don't think. The war gear options won't change at all as per this kit. I think they're playable enough for big strikes with rapid ingress, though I guess in the new codex there could be some additional rules from the first company task force that could be interesting for them. That sounds like it's almost certainly going to be a detachment based around veterans and Terminators. Finally, for Terminator things, we've got the Chaplain and Captain. The Chaplain model appears to have a couple of different aesthetic choices. You can either choose the skull mask or just a half skull mask and leave the top of his head bare. And it looks like you can actually customize the top of his Crodius Arcanum as well, either basically a 4-winged or 2-winged mace. Otherwise, his main war gear choice is the option between a Storm Shield and a Storm Bolter. Kind of surprising to see a Storm Shield on the Chaplain, as that's not something that they've really had in the past. I guess he'd be choosing between a small flurry of anti-infantry shots or an extra wound on the model. Neither of them really feel like they're going to change the world enormously there. The previews did basically confirm that it's not really changing in any meaningful way since the index, giving +1 to wound in melee and a 4+ mortal wound protection for the Terminators, both of which are quite good things. I feel like it's perhaps one of the better characters to lead them with 2 very useful buffs. That definitely has strong competition with the Terminator Captain with 3 stratagems on such a big block. Finally, talking of which, the Terminator Captain does indeed get a new reimagined flexible model. A few more options than the Leviathan Captain has, but perhaps not quite as many as some people were hoping for. For his melee weapon he gets the choice of either a Relic Blade or Power Fist, and then a Storm Bolter or Combi weapon in the offhand. I must admit I was kind of hoping that they would go for an extremely flexible captain with all manner of war gear options. The datasheet from the start of 10th edition and the index kind of implied that they might get a bit more than that. It did have rules and stats for a whole bunch of things that captains had never really had much in the past in Terminator armor. I do think it's a fairly cool model, and I guess it's a bit more of a generic look to a captain as opposed to the one who's stomping the Tyranid Screamer killer face into the ground. I'm perhaps not quite as excited for this guy as some of the rest though, and I feel like I'd be very happy just to stick with the Leviathan one that I've got. Again, this one being available in the 40k starter set likely means that they're going to be going very cheap on eBay. You'd probably be able to pick up this guy as a fraction of a cost from people reselling from that box set. Cost-wise, I suspect that the multi-part kit though from Games Workshop would likely be around £25, €32 or $40. Again, that's based on the Gravis Captain as a similar chunky character. I'd expect to be around about that kind of price point for the Captain and Chaplain. So anyway, now the dust has settled a little bit on the Space Marine reveals, let me know what you're most interested in out of these new releases, if any of them. How do you like Games Workshop's updated versions of the Firstborn miniatures, as opposed to more flavours of Weird and Wonderful Primaris coming out? Finally, as mentioned earlier in the video, feel free to check out the links in the video description if you want to be entered for a chance to win some of these miniatures, either supporting the channel via the Patreon page or supporting the channel on social media for free and entering via the Facebook posts are both equal and they're done with a random number generator. Hopefully should either kickstart people's Space Marine armies with a bang or provide some new and updated reinforcements to other people's. In any case, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. And if you would like to help support the channel on Patreon, there are a few other benefits for that. Seeing certain videos early, voting to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and getting your name in the credits for higher tier patrons. All that's found in the link in the video description if you're interested in helping keep these videos coming. In any case, an absolutely massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys in the next video.